purpose of this workshop is ultimately to strengthen you guys and give you guys a stronger foundation where your activism can flow from. So we'll be talking a lot about how to establish that strong foundation. And I want to inspire you guys with some of the foundations that I've been able to learn and build upon over the last few years, especially as it relates to how I've been managing my mental health doing activism, speaking about all these global campaigns that I've been able to attend, and share with you guys what I've been able to learn from that experience. I kind of want to do this a little bit differently. It's not going to be your traditional master class or anything, but I want this to be something more interactive. I actually want to do a Q&A at the start for a little bit. Does anybody have any questions they want to start off with, just things that they would potentially want to get out of this workshop, or things they'd want to learn, or areas where they feel like they can improve or get more of an understanding?
So sometimes I'm struggling to get a feeling of if this person being genuine. Is there any tip on how to read them?
Yeah, so at least from my experience, there's a lot of people who are at least potentially open to receiving the message, but when it comes to whether they're being genuine or not, that is kind of moving the focus out of you as an activist and putting it on an outcome, right? So I have seen, a lot of people sometimes when they're doing outreach, it goes really smoothly, really simply. They are very agreeable, and then they say that they're going to go vegan from now, and then, that's it. I've seen some activists essentially try to get like a reassurance, like that they're going to go vegan in this moment. And one, I don't think that is something that we should be doing, because it kind of undermines the simplicity of the topic, right? For example, if they are agreeable and they say that they're going to go vegan, and you're like, are you sure? Are you serious? Like, are you committed? Like, and then you've asked like 4 times. Essentially what you are saying is that this is like a surprise to you, right? It's a surprise to you that you don't actually feel like people would want to stop oppressing animals. Does that make sense? So I think it's not up to us to necessarily focus on whether the person was genuine or not, but just represent the victims as best as you can, send the message that you can, plant the seed. The seed ultimately that we want to plant is one that will remind them every time that they're about to exploit an animal for whatever reason, the conversation that you had, and holding them accountable to the fact that they don't want to be the oppressor here. So we're here to be educators, and the best way to educate is to hold people accountable. Yeah, rather than asking them if they're genuine, because again, you don't want to undermine their, like, what if they are being genuine, and then you're now like questioning the it's like, well, why are you questioning? Like, are you saying that I might not have a strong character or something like that? Just push like more. If you feel like there's not genuineness, just explain more the urgency, explain more the severity. Never doubt the decision that they have already made. Does that make sense? Like, you don't ever, if they've said they're going to go vegan now, don't ask them again. So just to confirm you're going to go vegan from now, like, to me it seems kind of like, yeah, like you, like, because I see this a lot, that as vegans we feel like we're an inconvenience to others. We feel like we're kind of like, what's the right word, a nuisance, right? But we're not, right? We're here representing the victims, and all of us, have the same regret where we wish we went vegan sooner, right? So I don't think we should take that away from anybody who makes the declaration at that point, right? And get them to just be more empowered. So rather than like them feeling or leaving the conversation feeling like, why did she doubt that I was actually going to make this choice? We want them to be walking away feeling like they are now a superhero. They have the opportunity to be representing and speaking up for these animals, right? So try and get them to leave empowered, rather than like, in that like, oh, am I doubting myself? Why was she doubting that I was going to go? Does that make sense?
In the middle of the conversation, if I'm feeling like they might not be genuine, because I've heard some activists say you can check in with them, ask them, are you being genuine, or ask the other person there, do you believe him? Would you say to do that or not?
I mean, I would say it's like, if you feel that, then just try and like push in other ways, I would never, feel the necessity to call somebody or ask them if they're being genuine. I'd rather just ask them if they understand, right? If they're following, like if they're fully like there in the conversation with you and understanding the points that you're making, rather than just asking them if they're genuine. But
I can feel how that can be more effective. Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah. We're gonna start off with what is veganism, because we're here. The name of this workshop is Moving Towards a Vegan World. So veganism is not a diet, it's not a lifestyle, it's not a trend, it's not a choice, it's not an identity. Does everybody agree with that? Yeah? Awesome. So it is a principle, it's about justice, it's about abolition, it's about liberation, and it's about emancipation. So this is ultimately at the very root of what we are fighting for. And when we know this clearly, our outreach becomes more effective, our confidence grows, and our mental health is protected. So Leslie Cross in 1951 defined the movement, and he defined it when he said, "The word vegan shall mean the doctrine that man should live without exploiting animals." Ultimately, this was a doctrine which means essentially like a principle, and it was built upon the foundation that no one exists to be used. And it clarified that animals are essentially also someone, not something. Therefore, they don't exist for us to use, which ended up becoming the principle that humans should live without exploiting other animals. And it's clear that they were, throughout the texts that were published in the Vegan Society, that this was about the relationship between humans and other animals, right? So it wasn't about humans, and it wasn't about animals and other animals. So it's important to understand that if somebody is talking about lions killing other zebras, that has nothing to do within the scope of veganism. It's not one of the problems, if it is a problem that veganism seeks to solve, as well as human injustices like racism and everything. While we should care about those, that's not specifically what veganism itself seeks to abolish, right? When it comes to a justice movement, there's usually always the victim, the oppressor, and the type of oppression, right? So it's clear within this movement and all movements who is the victims, who is their oppressor, and what is actually happening, right? So here we have the victims who are the other animals, the oppressor, which are humans, and the oppression is this false belief that animals exist to serve us, right? So that's absolutely clear without the text. So understanding this will also help you guys when you're speaking, when you're defending the animals in the best way that you can. So for example, like something that you can say just to keep your power, if somebody brings up, well, lions, kill other animals too, right? You'll remember that, okay, this isn't about killing, right? All you have to say is, look, while that may be an issue and you can start a movement to fight against that if you want, but veganism here is about humans not exploiting animals. So if you want to have a conversation about that, I'm here to have that conversation with you guys, right? You don't have to go down these tangents, and that'll help keep your power and protect your mental health ultimately, right? So everything we covered today, from outreach to confidence, resilience, and all the campaigns, flows from that simple definition, right? And I want to ask you guys, is anybody not able to remember that? Does anybody want me to repeat that? It will come up. But do you guys find it simple to memorize? Humans should live without exploiting animals? Yeah? Other animals, yeah. So the reason that I asked that is because simplicity is power. Simplicity is strength, right? So I remember asking last week, or the week, it was last week, if anybody was able to memorize the definition that the Vegan Society uses on their current website. And one person raised their hand, or I think two people raised their hand, but I asked those two people to recite it to me, and they actually couldn't, right? So of the two people who thought they actually could recite it, they also couldn't. So this is my point, is once it becomes this long definition and it's about a lot of things and it's not super clear and simple, it makes it harder for us to be defending that, right? So as an activist, we should know exactly what we're fighting for. So we have to know what the objective is, what is the goal of this movement. And also when Leslie Cross released the definition, he made it clear what the goal or what the objective of the movement is. And that is to end all forms of exploitation of non-human animals by humans, right? So it's clear that that's the goal, and once we reach that, you know, us right now, people like to, you know, label us as vegans, right? We ourselves might label us as vegans, but it's important to remember that once this objective is reached, there's now a vegan world. We're no longer going to be referring to ourselves as vegan, right? So it's important to remember that as vegans, we're uniting under a cause, and we're uniting under an objective, right? We don't necessarily need to be family. Like there might be some of us who don't get along. You know, all of us are going to have our own interests, right? And that is completely okay, right? But when it comes to the movement, it's important to leave ourselves out of it. When we show up, we're showing up for the victims. We're trying to just amplify their voice, right? They have a voice, but they've been voiceless in society. They don't have a say, right? So it's up to us to amplify that on their behalf. And the best way we can do that is essentially to put ourselves in that position. Picture what it would be like to be someone's slave, or, you know, be exploited in any way for whatever reason, right? How would I want somebody to defend me? How would I want someone to speak up for me? And if you have that behind everything that you're saying, okay, would I be okay with somebody speaking up for me in this way? Am I being, you know, too soft? Am I being too strict? Am I being, you know, reckless? Am I being strategic? Am I being smart? Am I being respectful, right? However you would want to be spoken up for should be how you're speaking up for others. So I want everybody to pause and for a couple minutes just reflect on a time that you had burnt out. And maybe this time you were feeling drained, or you were feeling kind of demotivated, or you were kind of like just upset with the world. You were kind of like looking around, seeing all this, you know, oppression around you, or you were sitting at a dinner table and you just felt this kind of frustration, like, you know, this is never gonna, we're never gonna get to a vegan world. Just sit with this for a second, for a minute or two, and then I want you guys to share with me a little bit about what it was exactly that caused you to get into those feelings. So I'll give you guys a minute to reflect on that first. Next minute, I want you guys to reflect on how you could have possibly handled that situation differently and come up with maybe a solution for yourself on what you could have done or differently. What I've kind of learned from my experience and speaking with others on the topic, most of the time, the drain comes from essentially feeling like you're not doing enough, or feeling some kind of hopelessness or defeatism, right? And so ultimately, if we can remove that, then rather than having to deal with the mental health after it's you know, already present, we can actually prevent these things from happening in the future. And so for me, I always feel like prevention is always going to be more effective than dealing with. So what do I do to help myself prevent getting burnt out? And to tell a little bit of a story, about 3 years ago, I was an organizer in Calgary, and I wanted to start traveling, and, you know, I was, with my work, I was being asked to go to these conferences and everything. So I started traveling, and I had to step down as being the organizer. And you know, I was feeling a little bit burnt out. I was doing a lot for the animals at that time, and felt like I needed to do something for myself and for work. And the reason mostly was because, you know, after I look back now and reflect, I didn't really have a structure. I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't have a solid foundation. I didn't really even understand fully what veganism was back then. So that caused me to go into kind of what you're saying, debates. I was also focusing a lot on whether or not I can convince the person to go vegan, right? So it was more about my ego rather than about the message, rather than being about truth and educating, right? And even in my chapter, there was this game of like, oh, like maybe you can convince him if you can't convince him, and somebody would get passed around maybe 3 or 4 times before we realized none of us, you know, was able to convince him. So ultimately, it was a lot of ego involved in my activism. And so from taking a step back, I was able to really like go through this process and figure out, okay, how can I come back? How can I, you know, remove this burnout and what is going to truly make me want to come back. And there was a few key elements, and one was building a stronger foundation, recognizing that my language, first and foremost, wasn't actually defending the animals in the best way that it possibly could. And that came with understanding the definition and understanding how to properly defend that position when all the arguments come up, right? Part of it too was through becoming more effective, I recognized that people were actually listening more. And when you do have a conversation, it always is a little bit of a boost if they actually make a declaration to go vegan, right? So through getting in more declarations, I was also able to get more energized, right? Also, with other people around me, that was always something that lifted me up, having a strong community, and also seeing part of the team make declarations and handshakes and people jumping in the cube. That was always like another thing that would lift me up, right? So it kind of became this numbers game almost of like making sure that you're looking for things that are going to lift you up rather than looking for things that are going to bring you down, right? So, rather than focusing on how many people you didn't, convert or didn't get to go vegan, or how many trolls you spoke to today, always focusing on, like I talked to like 4 people and they went vegan, and I know you had some people go vegan, and in that space, that's where you find your energy, right? So when it comes to maintaining your mental health, I feel like being the most effective that you possibly can be is the most effective thing to actually prevent. And if you guys are looking for motivation, ultimately there's a big problem with obviously being a vegan in a non-vegan world and looking around, and there's this, I guess, condition that's been labeled as Vistopia, right? Has everybody heard this word, Vistopia? I have the definition here. So it's the existential crisis experienced by vegans characterized by distress, anxiety, and a sense of alienation due to their awareness of animal exploitation and the collusion with the dystopian world that values oppression over justice, right? So it's this kind of like overwhelming feeling that we get when we look around, nobody's vegan, there's all these, animals being exploited everywhere, and it can weigh on us, right? So if you're in that state, definitely maybe, seek some kind of guidance if you can, or if you need to get yourself in a better place. But how to prevent that ultimately is like the best cure for this, what I'm trying to say, is a vegan world, right? So if you understand that you're feeling this, ultimately try to turn that into a fire that's going to help you push the movement forward, rather than trying to become, a little bit discouraged or unmotivated by thinking this is never going to happen, right? Because what are you actually saying if you're saying I don't feel like the world is ever going to go vegan? When you're saying that, what you're saying is the animals aren't enough, right? So for example, if we take like a human injustice, let's say we took slavery. Imagine if we actually thought that, well, black people aren't enough of a reason for slavery to be abolished, or the slave trade to be abolished, right? That is absolutely ridiculous. And I guarantee you there's more people who actually care about animals than care about other humans. And this is why I know that the world will be vegan. And probably it will happen a lot sooner than a lot of people even realize, because I understand how powerful these individuals are and how innocent they are on top of that, right? So it's important for us to find this motivation, to find this kind of fire that says, yes, the world is going to go vegan and I need to be a part of it. If I'm not a part of it, I'm actually pushing in the opposite direction. Because what I'm doing as a vegan is I'm setting an example for other vegans that it's okay to sit back and not do anything, right? And if enough of us are actually moving and people are seeing us move, then they will start to feel like, oh man, like all these vegans around me are doing something and I'm the only one who's not doing something, right? They will get motivated. They will get motivated by you guys, your passion, your fire, your energy, and your actual drive to make this happen, right? And just, I'm inspired that all of you guys are here. It's amazing to see, and I love this city and I love the dedication here. And, I can already recognize that from last year when I was here, there's more activists, there's more strength, and there's more unity, and I'm loving it. So so the other thing is, when it comes to mental health, distorting messaging is part of that thing that will drain you, right? As Michael was mentioning, the message was probably distorted. It wasn't being delivered properly, right? So that will also bring you down, because you're going to end up in conversations that are longer than they are supposed to be. You're going to come out of the conversation literally that maybe took an hour, wondering like why that person didn't go vegan, right? Rather than looking around and being like, who's the next person I can talk to? Who's the next person I can educate, right? So the mentality that you have going into every conversation is also important. Going into a conversation being like, oh man, I have to talk to another non-vegan and hope that he goes vegan, and so you're going in with this already like defeatist attitude of, yeah, this person doesn't want to go vegan. Veganism is a nuisance, so like why would he want to make that change, right? Recognize that pretty much nobody in society has been held accountable, especially by somebody who is trained on, a method that actually holds them accountable, right? So when I go up to somebody and I'm about to have a conversation with them, all I'm thinking is this person is a conversation with me away from being an animal defender, right? Somebody who's going to speak up for the animals the way that I'm speaking up for them, right? Because that's where I want to set the bar. That is my goal, let's call it, from being in that conversation with them, right? So that is what I'm going to call them to action for, right? And why wouldn't somebody want to be that person, right? Why wouldn't somebody want to be doing that? If we're all here, we're all, vegan, we're all learning about veganism, we're all learning about activism, right? We're all trying to grow ourselves. That means that there's a reason why we're here. And if we can reconnect with that reason, reconnect fully the principle that this is about justice for the non-human animals, right? Then, yeah, why wouldn't somebody also want to be making that connection and being right here with us, right? So the truth strengthens us. That is the ultimate power that we have. And distortion will exhaust us. One more thing is language is also going to be really important for this mental health prevention. It's what's going to keep us resilient, right? So when we frame veganism around something other than justice, for example, when we frame it around health or environment or welfare or some kind of other human problem, right? Now we're actually making the topic more complex, right? When we make it more complex, it's harder to defend. That's where the debates come in. That's where the statistics come in. That's where that's where like the rest of the population feels like they can actually beat you in a debate on the topic, right? So if they're in this energy of like thinking through their conversation, they're not actually feeling, right? Because at the end of the day, like you can come up with a million excuses, and once every excuse is debunked, there's probably going to be new excuses that come up, right? But you can't run from what you feel. Does that make sense to everybody, right? So when you're talking about health, maybe the person doesn't care about their health. If we're talking about the environment, maybe the person doesn't care about their environment. Welfare is ultimately, we've had these conversations often, but I think the biggest thing that hits this point home is without any industry that exploits animals, the welfare industry doesn't exist, right? So it's important to recognize that these industries and these projects and companies and organizations are heavily funded. They have so much money, but all that money disappears once the industry disappears, right? So it's not in their best interests to abolish these industries, right? So ultimately, the best thing for them is that this form of slavery is just as, happy and as sunshine and rainbows as it could be, right? So if what we are asking for is the abolition of slavery, the abolition of exploitation, it's important that our message represents that, right? At least not to distort veganism as some kind of demand for better treatment, right? If you want to do some kind of activism that's related to a welfare cause, I'm not going to say yes or no, like what you should do or not, but just understand that by calling that vegan activism per se, you do risk distorting the message, right? I think there are welfarist causes that people can relate with. Maybe it's a certain animal and they want to help rescue those animals and save them, and I think there's nothing wrong with that. But it's important to recognize the risk of diluting veganism to be about those things. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah. So when we root in principle, the burden lifts, right? The simplicity shows up. It's easy to be a voice. You don't have to make this complicated, and it's very simple. Animals are individuals just like us, and they do not deserve to be exploited. So set them free. That's the language that we need to use. We don't need to be talking about killing. We don't need to be talking about suffering. We don't need to be talking about the harm or the abuse or anything like that. Like, these are all problems in and of itself, but they all come from the root. Once the root disappears, all of those treatments also disappear, right? So there's a quote by a philosopher: for every 1,000 people attacking the branches, there's one person attacking the root, right? So if you just keep on breaking off these branches, they're just going to keep growing back because the tree is still there. If we try to attack this from the root, it's easier. We don't have to go into all these other conversations, and we actually cover all of those conversations at the same time with that simple message. So we're going to be speaking about confidence here soon, but a little bit more now, moving to the next section about foundation. So when your activism is based on principle, it cannot be shaken. And that's the important thing, because principles are what guide our actions. Principles are essentially who we are below our actions and where our actions actually come from, right? So things like eating animals or wearing leather, these are all practices, right? So when we talk about veganism as a principle, all of these practices are essentially what flow from the vegan principle, but it's not those practices that define it, right? Does that make sense to everybody? So as a vegan, it's not, I don't eat animals, I don't wear leather, I don't go to zoos, I don't go to circuses. It's not just like a whole list of things, right? And we actually don't necessarily need to tell people what is or what isn't vegan in terms of what practices, right? Because once somebody recognizes at a foundational level that this is immoral, they start to leave knowing how to ask the questions. So, oh, is this going to be something moral or not? Am I okay with purchasing this item? Like, now I need to check, is this item actually vegan, right? So you've placed this foundation in them that's going to actually do something about it when they leave, right? You haven't just been like programming them as a robot to leave here and only buy plant-based products and not wear leather and not wear fur or something like that, right? So it's impossible to go through the whole list of everything that's non-vegan, and even us, we're still finding out certain things aren't vegan, right? So when you plant that proper seed that gets them leaving with the understanding of what they're supposed to be doing, with who they actually want to be, they start looking for these solutions, right? They start figuring out how to align their actions with the principle that they hold. And that's so much easier than just trying to like force somebody into a separate diet or a new lifestyle or whatever else people have distorted veganism to be, right? Does everybody think that that's powerful, right? Does anybody have any comments or experience that they would like to share with regards to this?
Yeah, when I describe veganism, I do go into the practices, just like have a few lists of examples to get them on the same page. But when you describe veganism to people, do you just stay with the principle and let them kind of figure it out in their own head?
So when I'm usually explaining exploitation, that's where I will list, right? So if I'm defining exploitation, I'm usually defining it in the simplest way possible, using someone for your purposes or for your selfish purpose. For example, exploiting someone for their flesh or for their, breast milk or eggs or, riding horses, whatever, transportation, entertainment, right? I don't think it's wrong to essentially like state that, but it's what I would say it's wrong to define it as that, right? But you don't need to essentially list every single practice. I think the importance during outreach on the street is just to get them to understand that this isn't just about what they eat or who they eat, right? Because a lot of that misconception is that veganism is a diet. So I think that is really the purpose there, just to get them to understand that it's not a diet. And that's why you can list a little bit of other practices. But I do see a lot of people go into like try and literally tell the person everything that they're supposed to do, and we'll talk 5 minutes about all the things that aren't vegan. And I think that's probably a little bit unnecessary. So yeah, find what fuels you. Something else I can add when it comes to mental health is also just taking care of your actual health, right? Being healthy, exercising, hanging out with friends that you enjoy being around, getting rid of some toxic people in your life, or getting good sleep, all these things contribute to your actual health. And that also allows you to have a life outside of veganism, right? Because again, once the world is vegan, we're not going to be doing this type of activism anymore. We're back to being regular people, right? So, that's who we are. Be somebody outside of this, right? I know that, for myself, there's times where, I feel like I can't do anything else, but I understand that it's important that I take breaks. That's part of activism. Going on a vacation is part of activism, right? Don't separate it from that. Right? Understand that that's going to help you be the better activist and the best activist that you can be. And so don't feel guilty if you need to take a day off. Don't feel guilty if you need to spend a day in bed or a weekend on the beach or something, okay? Thank you for sharing. So, what's that? Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, I just want to ask you about how do you, when you go into talking to someone, how do you manage your expectations? Do you have the expectation that you're going to get them to respond positively to it? Is that an intention, or is it more even if you just educate them a little bit, is that considered a success?
How I see it is every single conversation and interaction that you have is going to shift reality in some way, right? So you won't be able to shift reality at all if you're not doing anything, right? But when it comes to expectations, I've learned that placing an expectation is actually setting myself up to get depressed or anxious or stressed or angry, because if I have an expectation going into that conversation, even if it's just like this person's going to go vegan, and what happens is if that expectation isn't met, then it's going to affect me in some kind of way. And what's going to happen is I'm actually going to give my power to that person. And so when I go into the conversation, I have an open mind, I'm clear, and I don't have an expectation, right? This person may go vegan, they may not go vegan, right? They may become the next big vegan activist, right? That person could become bigger than Earthling Ed. They could start the next biggest organization, right? You never know. But at the end of the day, none of that possibility is there unless I go and talk to them, right? So I focus more on what I'm going to say, how I'm going to say it, and that will allow me to truly speak from truth, keep my message simple, and then I don't have to worry about being angry afterwards, or sometimes they might say something really just disgusting, and that might affect me internally. I might need to step away for a couple minutes and just reset. What I've noticed is certain people, right when you start the conversation, even if you don't know they're environmentalists or something, they just react in this way that's like, man, they seem to care so much, or they're so affected by what let's say it's a screen, a slaughterhouse footage or something, right? And we kind of get this I know it's happened to me where I start already thinking in the future where man, this person's definitely going to be vegan after this conversation because look how receptive he is to this, right? And so I've already placed that same kind of expectation, and then you get to the end and you ask him, so vegan from now, and then it just blows up, and it's whoa, how can you be this empathetic and this upset about what you're seeing, but also not want to do anything about it, not even change, and actually you're fighting back. Just because that person doesn't tell you that they're going to go vegan, it could be because of ego. In that moment they don't want to feel like you're right, I'm wrong, so they just walk away and they won't give you what you're looking for or anything like that. So you never know what is going to happen with them afterwards. If you keep this simple, speak the truth, and represent the animals the best you can, they might go vegan the next day, they might go vegan next week. You might see them again in a couple months, and maybe they're a little bit closer, or, you know, again, every time you have that conversation, you are shifting reality a little bit, right? And that's, I think, the thing to focus on, right? So if you can work around getting away from those expectations, just go into seeing them, hey, you're either vegan or you're non-vegan, whether you're environmentalist, whether you're, you know, somebody who cares about animals a lot. I know people who care about animals so much and they're not vegan, right? So it's just important to place them in that category of either vegan or non-vegan and go from there, right? Help?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Anybody else want to share something before I have a little activity for us? So I wonder, so now we have the principle for veganism, that humans should live without exploiting animals. If you guys were to brainstorm, just like together, all of us, what the definition of vegetarianism would be, what would be some ideas that you guys would have? Anybody want to give it a shot? Definition of vegetarianism.
Humans should live without eating the final product of exploiting animals to death.
Okay. Anybody else want to?
Consuming animal derivatives, but not like directly like flesh.
Paying for animal exploitation. How to explain this?
I think still the ethical principle, but not killing animals.
Yeah. I think that's probably the simplest way. The ethical principle that we should live without killing other animals for food. That's probably the only thing I would add. But that's exactly how I would have defined it. So kind of like the humans should live without exploiting animals, vegetarianism would be, we can exploit other animals, we just can't kill them to consume their flesh directly. But everything else, their secretions and whatever else, we can exploit them for. So I want you guys, with that definition of what vegetarianism is and an understanding of what veganism is, maybe split up into like little groups. Maybe we can make 3 or 4 here. And I want you guys to come up with a few sentences for phrases that you've seen at outreach or online or wherever that send a non-vegan message by a vegan, and then certain messages that send a vegan message. For example, like a vegan trying to advocate but accidentally saying a vegetarian message. And then I want you to list a couple that would be a vegan message that you've seen online. So let's focus on specific messaging that you've seen. And you can maybe even use your phone to find something if you need help right now. But I'll give you guys a couple minutes just to work. And maybe one of you guys on the phone, write them down, and I'll ask you guys to share them. Do you guys want to share first?
Okay, so meat is murder would be one. It's kind of more vegetarian and it's definitely disingenuous.
Mm-hmm.
So a replacement for that would be.
Oh, that wasn't part of the.
Oh, that wasn't part of. Oh, okay.
That's supposed to be the next part of the.
Okay. So yeah, meat is murder.
Shall I write down at least?
Yeah. If there's more, then yeah, read them.
Friends, not food. Pets. Animal rights. Milk.
What was the last one?
Milk.
Milk. Yeah.
Foie gras is cool, as long as it's done in a good way. And then vegan messaging, it's not about the quantity of individuals exploited, it's about the fact that any are, and there's no way to respectfully exploit any individual.
Perfect. Yeah. You guys want to?
If you love them, don't eat them. There's 2 problems with that. It's focusing on eating, exploiting animals for flesh, and also that it's about compassion. And I just thought of one just now, which I'd like to bring up, because
Yeah.
I'm not sure if everyone agrees on this one, but if you say vegan for the animals, suggests that you could be vegan for other reasons.
Yeah. Of course.
Okay.
I say that like kind of all exploitation is abuse. Basically. We worded it differently,
Mhm.
This was the sense of
If
it.
you're not vegan, you're an animal abuser
Yeah.
because it's about exploitation. So it implies that there is the right way to exploit.
Yeah.
When we think
And
about it, it's kind of hard to find like the placards we've seen that have the right vegan message. Actually.
yeah. It's very common. Yeah. Yeah, that one that you brought up, if you're not vegan, you're an animal abuser, is, or even just talking about abuse in general, like when we understand that this is about exploitation, and ultimately exploitation is using somebody, right? So when you understand that there's no right way to use somebody, abuse implies that there is a way, like what it implies is that you're misusing, right? So that means that there's potentially a way that you can use somebody, and that's, you know, very dangerous, right? And then when it comes to all exploitation is abuse, or all abuse is exploitation, you know, I hear this, and I do think that there are certain edge cases where you can be abusing someone and not exploiting them, and at the same time, there's cases where you can be exploiting somebody without abusing them. I'll give you guys some examples, and you guys can share if you guys agree or not. But for example, like let's say you happen to be vegan, and you are going to the grocery store, and you bring your dogs with you, and then it's really hot outside, and you're like, end up leaving your dogs in the car. You don't roll down the windows, right? And you leave them in there for a couple hours. It takes you a lot longer, and these dogs are cooking in this vehicle, right? I would consider that animal abuse, right? Would I say that that person isn't vegan? Probably not, right? So all of a sudden he's become an animal abuser and he's a vegan. So calling somebody, if you're not vegan, you're an animal abuser, you know, it doesn't fully hit the mark, right? So, you know, again, I don't really want to say don't call people animal abusers, because it could be powerful and emotional, but just understand that that's not a vegan message. And there's a way that you could replace that with something more powerful, which will be the next little workshop. So, and then types of exploitation that could be considered non-abusive. And when we say the word abuse, also what people understand it to be is some kind of like, you know, cruel treatment, or like you've inflicted pain on somebody or something like that. So any type of, let's say, backyard chickens, right? My chickens are treated really well. They're like treated like kings or something like that, right? But I'm taking an egg from them, right? Am I really abusing anyone in that situation? Maybe the chickens were even rescued from a factory farm or something, right? So now they're just rescued, so I'm just letting them live out their lives on this big piece of land, but every once in a while I take an egg, right? So that would still be considered exploitation. I'm still using them for some purpose of mine, right? To get some kind of nutrients from them, right? But then there's no abuse present, right? So what we do know is that when you're focusing on the word exploitation, you're always going to be covering the real injustice, right? So you don't ever risk going off on different tangents and talking about different causes, maybe vegetarianism, maybe welfareism, or something else like that, right? Does anybody disagree with that?
maybe on the definition of abuse, like slightly, like it's I would say that use and abuse in this case don't have that much of a difference, because in a technical sense, there isn't like inflicting cruelty upon someone is different than just like taking something from them when you're not
Yeah.
physically hurting them.
Yeah.
But for the purpose of veganism, I do think that exploitation and abuse like coincide.
Okay.
So I don't know.
Yeah,
It's a different view.
So what I would probably say as an example is when you're thinking about some kind of medication, right? So medications exist for us to use, right? But can I abuse a medication, right? Like if I am, you know, taking the whole bottle of Tylenol, right? Now I'm abusing that. I'm not using it properly, using the medication properly, right? So that's where when it comes to the word abuse, when you're using it in that situation, there is a way to actually abuse that and use that substance, right? So when it comes to animals, that's where I'd say because there's no way to use them, it would never necessarily be abuse, because all forms of using them would be exploitation.
I think we agree, but like,
Yeah?
it's like
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm just, this is
different ways, yeah.
this is also going to help you guys in, having these conversations with others, right? So if somebody is presenting you with this argument of like, oh, but all abuse is exploitation, all exploitation is abuse, at the end of the day, that's like maybe more semantic, but what we do know for sure is just focusing on the word abuse or the word exploitation or use is going to be, unambiguous. It's going to be simple, clear, and get the message across perfectly, right? And there are probably places where you can talk about abuse and use that word within the message, right? But as long as the message fully is about exploitation, right? So, for example, if you're talking about the mindset, right, and talking about how the mindset flows into all these certain other practices, like because you view animals as resources for you, you have no problem abusing them to make more profit. You have no problem causing them, all these kind of things. So there is a place for them, but it's about understanding that they come from that mentality, right? Great. And then, so for this part of the activity, take those messages. If you think of another message, I can give you guys some if you'd like. Something I see all the time is there's no ethical way to kill somebody who doesn't want to die, right? There's riding horses is abusive, right? Backyard chickens, for example. So I want you to take two phrases. You can use the ones that you've picked, or you can pick two different ones. And I want you to create a way to essentially say that same message, probably in response to the same kind of prompt that would trigger that, but with vegan messaging. All right, so do that one quickly, and then let me know when you guys are ready, and then one thumbs up from each group. We can continue.
Friends, not food, so we framed it as animals are companions and not products for us to use.
Oh,
Okay. Yeah.
And another one is no excuse for animal abuse, which can be translated to animal exploitation can never be justified.
Perfect. You guys want to?
Farm growers through all practices that exploit other animals are.
There's no one.
Yeah, there's no. What? Oppressive.
Perfect.
So all practices that exploit other animals are oppressive.
Perfect. Yeah.
And we put everything that does that.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Good. What about you?
I think it was if you love animals, don't eat them. If you respect other animals, defend them.
Yeah. Perfect. You also added the defending, not
yeah,
just.
we initially said don't exploit them, then we were like, we should add activism.
Yeah. Perfect. Does anybody want to try correcting this phrase? There's no ethical way to exploit somebody who doesn't want to die? Or there's no, sorry. I see what I did there. There's no humane way to kill somebody who doesn't want to die. Yeah. So exploitation is never okay. Yeah, perfect.
It's always on the spectrum of unethical.
Yeah. So I want to quickly talk about the word exploitation quick, and how certain people have actually tried to redefine what exploitation is to serve exploitative ways. So the reason I define exploitation as using someone for your purposes is because it's simple and there's no loopholes. Whether your purpose is selfish or selfless from your perspective, then you can't come and say, oh, this is actually, like a lot of people, even in the vegan framework, he defines exploitation as selfish purposes. when I try to analyze it, what I actually see is selfish isn't necessarily the adjective of the word, but it's more that all purposes are selfish, right? So there's like, I think maybe in the 50s I used that type of wording where we don't right now. So rather than having someone say, oh, well, this is a selfless thing that I'm using them for, so then it's fine. Other things I've noticed is if we define exploitation as using someone for your benefit, that could imply that if you don't get any benefit, then it's not exploitation. And some things could be like, you know, if I'm eating to self-harm, like if I'm, you know, eating a lot or excessively, if I know that this is going to give me cancer and I'm doing it anyways, then that could be argued that it's not a benefit. And again, having really tight language will not create these loopholes. The other thing is, I hear, is using someone against their will. Nobody would willfully want to be used, right? So I think that those are just words that don't fit together. And same with consent. No one will ever be consenting to be exploited, right? And the last one is using somebody against their interest, right? So ultimately, because we can't communicate in English with animals, this is the most important one, because that has to create this space where we have to assume what's in their best interest, right? And so when it comes into this like world of assumption, anybody can create their own assumptions, right? And so from things that I've heard, one of the industries that's going to disappear with a vegan world is the animal testing industry, right? So I hear a lot from people who work within the industry. They define exploitation as using somebody against their interest. And ultimately, they've created these scenarios where there is a way to test on someone if it happens to be in their interest, right? So this is a huge problem because then it props up the whole industry and they don't have to disappear, right? So it's important to just keep the definition also really simple. Just using someone for your purposes. There's no loopholes and it's airtight. Now, the reason I'm saying this segues into the next part of the workshop, where it's about not giving non-vegans any ammo, right? So as soon as you give them even the smallest piece of ammo, they will use that against you, right? And for example, I was talking to someone a couple days ago, and she's like, yeah, my friend, she's vegan, and I saw her posting pictures of her riding a horse, right? And so I messaged her, I'm like, why are you riding a horse? That's animal abuse. Now, what would you guys, if you were to guess what her friend responded, I want someone just to guess what her friend would have responded to.
But they're treated well, or like what would they be?
Exactly. Exactly. They're happy. That's what she said that the vegan responded, right? So do you guys understand how she gave her that ammo that she could use against her in that response, right? So if she had said, well, that's still exploitation, they don't exist for you to ride, she couldn't come at her with this, oh, well, they're treated, she's happy, right? Because I didn't talk about treatment. I didn't talk about anything relating to that. She might still try and come at me with that, but then I can just repeat what I said, right? So when you're understanding what you say and you're thinking from a non-vegan perspective of like, okay, so if I'm going to say this, how would a non-vegan respond to what I would say? Then you're trying to understand what you say and the ammo that you're giving the other person when you say it, right? So when you're talking about killing, you're essentially giving the other person ammo to come at you and use some kind of appeal to hypocrisy, because you might be killing someone too if you're going for a car ride, right? Or if you're eating vegetables that come from these big farms, right? So when you're focusing on killing, you're giving ammo. So it's important to recognize that every single excuse like out there has essentially come from the way that vegans have been communicating the vegan message, right? So if you are using really effective language that has no loopholes, then you don't have to really deal with these excuses, right? And that's part of being effective for me that has just changed the whole game for me. Because I recognize that now, and you guys can watch when I post more of my videos, like I don't really get lots of objections. I don't really get these excuses that most people are getting, because I'm not letting the conversation get to that point. Because I've analyzed this stuff probably way too much, but I've just recognized these patterns. Okay, if I say this, that person says that. So how can I change what I said there to get a different answer from them, right? And that's why I did the workshop with you guys like this, to try and get you to like sit with the things that you're hearing, the things that you're saying, and start to think about how we can change this message so that there is no response that they can give you other than exposing that, yeah, they're selfish, right? That's ultimately what we as activists need to focus on, and also educate others on this is vegan messaging, this isn't vegan messaging, right? Again, the non-vegan messaging is all true, it's all valid, right? But it doesn't help us in the fact that it's not the most effective that it can be, right? And so that's why I'm particular with these kind of things, because actually it makes us more effective, it brings us to that vegan world faster, and our mental health is in a better place because we're not having to spend hours and hours talking about why plants feel pain, right? Does that make sense for everybody? Yeah?
Any examples of something that you've used for the public this time?
Yeah, so, I'll just tell like real things that I can think of, because I have this friend, she was getting into activism, right? And I was kind of pushing her, and so she starts kind of doing social media activism. And she was really happy that she was talking to this guy, and so she was sending me screenshots, and in response to something he said, she said one of these like sentences like, there's no humane way to kill somebody who doesn't want to die. And she was so proud, she took a screenshot and sent it to me, and I was like, because we were already in the education kind of, I was like, I would be careful answering like that, because chances are right now he's going to respond to you with the crop deaths argument. Like, oh, well, you kill plants too because you eat, or you kill animals too because you eat plants, right? And then like within like the same moment of I sent the message, she sends me a screenshot of his comment because she wanted me to help her with how to respond to that, right? So that's kind of what I'm talking about, is the crop deaths argument only exists because a lot of vegans talk about not killing animals, right? And then you have Joe Rogan, when he hears this argument about, hey, well, vegans essentially are just trying not to kill any animals, then, okay, well, let me find out how they're hypocrites in this realm. And then, oh, well, they kill animals too, right? So that's where that argument comes in, right? So if you're never talking about killing, then ultimately they have no reason to bring that into the conversation, right? So what I do instead is I'm usually focusing on slavery. So if I'm bringing up any example, I'm usually focusing on slavery because, one, most people actually understand slavery. We have a lot of data on slavery. We have a lot of examples of how activism was done during the time of slavery, right? And we all understand that the problem with slavery is not how the slaves are treated. It's not that they were killed at the end of their life. It's not that construction workers were also dying, and so we needed to focus on construction workers, right? And that's the parallel of crop deaths, is essentially saying, well, slavery is wrong. Well, construction kills people too. So if you're a hypocrite for So when it comes to slavery, it's clear that the problem is that we view them as property, that we believe they exist for us. So there's this mentality of human supremacy, right? When it comes to animals, we believe that they exist for us. We are superior, we have the right to use them, right? Just like the slave owners, whether it was white supremacy, hey, we have the right to use them because we are superior, right? So focusing on that root, the ideology, the worldview, that's where the power comes in, and slavery highlights that perfectly, right? So especially when I'm explaining exploitation or defining what veganism is, I'll say, so exploitation is using someone for your own purposes, for example, using you as my slave, right? And then when somebody goes into a treatment, so let's say like, I'm talking and then they come up with, well, my chickens are in my backyard and I treat them really well, right? What I do here is, this is actually the next step. So the next step is confidence. So when it comes to confidence, this is the tool that ultimately will give you the most confidence. If you were my slave, would you be okay if I treated you nicely? Right? So they've told you I treat my, my animals nicely, so then you flip it back on them. So if I was to make you my slave, would you be okay with that? Right? Because what you've done now is you've always exposed the mentality behind their excuse. Right? So in their mind, the only reason they're looking for excuses is because they still have the belief that animals exist to be used. Right? So with every response, if you're attacking that, you're slowly chipping away at really get them to understand the mentality that the excuses are coming from, right? So with any excuse that they actually give you, you can use that method, right? Have you ever heard of that before? Like placing them in the victim's position to, yeah. Has anybody here not ever tried that or never heard of that? No? Awesome. So does that give you a good foundation for that? So when it comes to confidence, this is the next part that I want to really address, because I feel like it's probably the biggest blocker for why people shy away from doing activism, right? I mean, especially for me, like I'm pretty introverted and I don't like really talking to people, but here I am giving workshops and speeches, and it just took a little bit of stepping out of my comfort zone. And when I first became an organizer, I was kind of like thrown in and didn't have a choice. But then when I took that step back and came back, the confidence came from really understanding what it was that I was doing when I was going out there. What my purpose is, what the structure is, and how I'm going to handle every single conversation, right? And through educating a lot of people around the world now, I always hear this, well, how am I going to know what I'm going to say? How am I going to know how to answer every single argument? Because there's so many arguments out there, right? And I've heard people say like, I've been reading this book and how am I supposed to memorize it? Or I was watching this guy debate, and how am I going to memorize all these stats? Or how am I going to memorize all these facts, right? And the reality is you don't. You don't need to, right? If you are trying to expose the mentality behind the excuses, it becomes really simple, right? And something that I also noticed when I was reflecting on the first couple of years of my activism is like, almost like nobody went vegan from me outreaching them on the street. There's probably a few, but it was like really low hanging fruit, right? So what I realized is people don't go vegan just because their arguments are debunked. Just because I had a better like response to their excuse, like that wasn't ever effective, right? But really exposing the injustice, getting them to recognize their participation and their perpetuation of that is always what led to people making a change, right? So if I'm just waiting for them to give me some argument and then I debunk it, and then I'm like sitting there, okay, what do you got next? And I'm just like, we're just like having this boxing match. Like one, that's the most exhausting thing, right? Pardon? Oh yeah, I used to do it all the time. I back then, that's what I studied. I studied, okay, how do I perfectly answer every single question, right? And I had it. I had everything. I had all the stats and I had all the facts, but it was like a pain. Like I was still I didn't like doing that activism, right? So, and that's why like I actually took the chance to step back and reflect. Because if I know all these things and I should be the most effective, then why isn't this working? Why isn't this feeling good? Why am I not getting these like energetic boosts that I should be, And I mean, ultimately, when I'm doing that, I'm spending way too much time with people, right? So I'm entertaining and I'm validating their excuses if I'm actually answering them, because I'm not exposing where they're coming from, right? So it's that simple tool, is reflect and be a mirror to show them what exactly it is that they're saying to you, right? Because I genuinely believe that most of the population doesn't want to be an oppressor, and especially an oppressor of animals, right? So if you're able to really get them to understand and recognize that, when they look in the mirror, they're gonna be like, that's not who I want to be. So when you give them the excuse back to them in that position of their victim, that will help them understand and make that connection, right? So, and you know, you could do this with every excuse. So like whether it's plants feel pain, or whether it's protein though, or whether it's, you know, whatever it may be. Would you be okay if somebody justified enslaving you and that was their reason, right? I haven't found a single, you know, non-vegan argument or excuse that this doesn't work for, right? Now, if someone is having more genuine concerns, like they're actually not really sure about where to get their protein, or they're not really sure, you know, if it's possible to actually be vegan, or whatever it may be, you know, you could spend a couple minutes with that person and help them, right? But one thing I like to do before I talk about the how is I try to ask them, if I solve this problem of yours, would you actually go vegan, right? Because then that gives me an incentive to want to help this person, right? So if they say, yeah, of course, okay, let's go through it. Like, but ultimately I want to teach them how to figure out how to be vegan, right? Rather than just telling them, you know, okay, well, iron is from like these and these plants and this and these plants, right? I just, hey, just literally go open your phone, go to Google and be like, what are the best plant sources of iron, right? They're like, oh yeah, okay, so now I've just taught them. Sometimes you have to do this, you know, like we have to teach them how to use Google all of a sudden, you know? So, but, you know, again, now you've empowered them to get them to realize that they could figure this out, and it's that easy, rather than them feeling this massive overwhelm, like, holy smokes, like I gotta go vegan, I gotta change everything, right? But in actuality, it's not hard. We know it's not hard, right? So if you're gonna focus on the how, that's where I like to spend a little bit of energy showing them how they can figure out how to do it, right? So, when it comes to confidence, the other aspect usually is the speaking to other people about this, right? That's where my biggest hurdle was, but I just kind of got thrown into the fire and had to go with it. So that might be, you know, a good thing, is just get out there, right? Maybe you're not essentially watching or you're not outreaching people directly, but you're going to be just at the cube, maybe at the 3-minute challenge, and you're just watching other activists, you know, listening to them. A great thing to do now is if there's somebody recording, just listen through one of the headphones of the conversations that are being recorded, and just be present, because when you're present at the events, even if you're not necessarily participating in the outreach, you might find that somebody actually stops beside you and happens to ask you just a question. And then all of a sudden you start entering this conversation. And especially when you're starting, these experiences can kind of be overwhelming. So you're trying to think, okay, what am I supposed to say? What if I say the wrong thing? If this is your first conversation, ultimately, like, just do your best, right? Because once you do your best, you know, no one's gonna like come at you and be like, oh, you said this wrong, you said that wrong. Everyone's gonna be happy that you actually took the chance, and then you actually started having this conversation, right? And that's where internally you can start building the confidence from there. If you know, analyze what you said, and you kind of for yourself think, okay, I could have said this differently, I could have done that differently, but also look at the things that you did good in those conversations. So, oh yeah, I'm really happy that I said that. I'm really happy that I even had that conversation. I'm really happy that I was there participating. I was with all the other activists, because even just showing that there's a lot of us at a cube for the public can be really powerful. When we were in Germany, there was about like sometimes 100 of us. And this we did at a campaign just a couple months ago now. Holy crap, it's already a couple months ago. But yeah, it was crazy because people would come up to us and thought that we were all getting paid to be there. That we were like this super professional organization and we're making lots of money, and it was like we're all volunteers here, you know? So this is what happens when we show up with numbers, right? So find something that you're good at the cube. Maybe you don't want to be talking to people and you want to be recording. You know, maybe you can invest in some camera equipment, right? Maybe it's just holding the TVs. Maybe you're just watching the table or guarding the equipment or something like that, right? Whatever it may be, at least if you're out there, you're going to be part of this, right? And at home, there's also a lot of things that can be done, like social media or video editing, or whatever. There's probably other admin tasks, like offer to help if you have some time. You can't make it to an event this week. Ask. Even like learning, because video editing is a huge demand for this right now. Over the whole campaign, I've managed to get over 2 terabytes of videos, and there's a lot of activists who don't know how to edit, so a lot of them are learning. And if other people want to help learn how to edit, this could be huge. It doesn't take that much effort to learn, just very simple and basic, throwing on some captions and cutting some stuff out. So that is a huge thing, and this is what we've actually been learning from these big campaigns, right? So I don't know, I heard some talks here about maybe doing a big campaign here, and I want to talk a little bit about the importance of these, right? When it comes to doing big campaigns, especially if you're doing 8-hour days, 2 or 3 days a week, it's a place where you can actually put something new into practice and learn about it, learn if this works, but also to be just out there and getting the practice required to master what it is that you're doing. Because where I'm from in Canada, we do a cube once a week, and then the next week we do the 3-minute challenge, and that's about essentially 12 hours of activism every month, right? So when I'm in Cologne, we're doing 6 hours a day. In 2 days, I do just as much activism as I would in a month, right? So when you put it into that perspective, 30 days, that's 15 months. That's a 1.5 years worth of activism that I'm doing in 1 month, right? So because by the time the next week comes back home, I'm rusty now. I'm like, okay, well, what did I learn last time again? And now I'm starting over, and then I'm still kind of back to where I was, right? So I don't have this practice. I don't have this consistency, right? So I wasn't actually able to really get better and have it stick. And then I was always kind of learning something new, and then I was always trying things, and we didn't really have a structure back then. So, coming to one of these events, if you guys get the chance to next summer, we'll be traveling around Europe again. I definitely recommend coming and taking, even if it's just a weekend off, right? That could be powerful. You'll get to see, the world's best activists in one place. You'll get to see what it's like when everything is operating with structure, with, everybody kind of accepting the fact that this is a team mentality, no one's there individually, and what it's like when we're all working together, right? So the other thing that's really powerful about these campaigns, because they're in really busy areas of the cities and there's so many activists, the amount of change that we're making, right? I don't think there was a day where at least, there was not a single day where there wasn't at least 100 people who had at least made a declaration to go vegan, right? Almost every single day there was about 10 people who were jumping in the cube for at least 2 to 5 minutes, right? And and from my perspective, when I've been hearing a lot of people don't think street activism is effective, or that it's useless, we need to be focusing on this or that or whatever. It's you've never seen what I'm seeing, because you won't see it unless you're there, right? And there's only maybe throughout the last 2 years, 1,000 activists in total who have been there, maybe a little bit more now. But when you're part of that and you see the difference that you're making, and you're hearing all the stories, you're seeing all the handshakes, you're seeing, and again, all these people may not go vegan right after that moment, right? But they're making a declaration. And when they're making a declaration out loud, you know, that means that they understand the urgency, the severity, they understand the problem, they understand their responsibility in it. And it's just like the same feeling, like if I was to like, you know, say like a really bad thing to my mother, you know, I would remember that forever. And it would probably haunt me, right? And so when I make a really strong declaration like that, it's something that you remember. And when I am in that declaration moment and I'm trying to get somebody to make a declaration, if they don't want to make a declaration, I have to give them a message that's going to sit with them forever, that they will remember, right? So Mir asked me a question today. Do you want to ask it again just so everybody can hear?
Yeah. So I was recording Stanley's conversation today, and if someone, they say they'll go vegan, but not today. So a couple of guys were saying to Stanley, not today, maybe we'll tomorrow, something else, but they were not committing. And same thing I observed in Paul Bashi's one of the videos. Then Paul handled it very well. He's directly said, is it your ego stopping you from saying yes to me directly? So I think it's just an extension of the flowchart, I think.
Yeah, so ultimately, how do we handle somebody who essentially wants to be vegan but doesn't want to make a declaration, right? So there's this fine line that we have to balance between begging the person to go vegan right now and kind of understanding whether there's ego from their side, because ultimately it could actually get into this ego battle, right? So the ego battle becomes, it's your ego that wants them to make this declaration now, and it's their ego that doesn't actually want to make the declaration right now because they don't want to admit to you that they want to be vegan and you're the one who convinced them or something like that, right? So this is where, you know, like what you're saying in Paul's case, he was able to actually call somebody out on this ego and said, you know, well, what is your hesitation here, right? Are you just not wanting to give me this declaration, right? So I think it's really important in this scenario, one, to make sure that they understand the declaration isn't for you. Like you're not trying to promise me to go vegan. You're promising the victims, your victims, that you're making a commitment to stop exploiting them, to recognize that they're individuals and not objects, right? And the other thing is you're also making this commitment to yourself, right? That this is something you actually want to be doing. And you're making this choice to let them free, right? So if it comes to it, like for me, there's probably in 90% of my conversations, I'll never ask somebody twice, right? If I ask them, so vegan from now, and they give me some kind of excuse, like I'll try. One thing I've also noticed is when people say they'll try, they may actually be genuine in the fact that by trying, they mean that they're gonna go vegan now and see how it feels, right? And so a lot of people maybe misunderstand that I'll try with like a different kind of try. Like I'll try eating some vegan food and see if I like it, right? So I think there's also like a level of discernment there with like what is it they actually mean by try. So like what I've been trying to explore is asking them, so when you say you want to try to go vegan, what is it actually, what are you trying to tell me? Like what is it that you're gonna try, right? Because then when they say something in response to that, then you can put them in the victim's position for that. Rather than like saying, well, if I was to try to stop exploiting you, would that be enough? Because for some people, it also may be a language barrier I've found that, you know, in their heart, they actually are saying they're gonna go vegan, but we assume that when we hear the word try, we may be traumatized by like other people just saying, oh, yeah, I'll try maybe in the future, right? So it's a way to actually bring out the intentions behind them trying, whether they're gonna actually try it, right? But do you guys understand what I'm saying? I'm trying to like still verbalize this, but ask them, what do you mean by trying, right? Because then you highlight, again, the reason why. You get to like dissolve that ego a little bit there, and then put them in the victim's position again and get them to understand why trying, in essence, isn't enough. Yeah. So, I mean, that's everything that I wanted to cover. So, if you guys see somebody new at a cube, lift them up, support them. There was a couple of weeks ago at the cube, a couple of new people, right? Even one of the people there, she was just nervous and anxious and kind of shy, didn't want to talk to anybody. So, I was just trying to work with her. So whoever I was shadowing with my camera, she was listening with me, and I was just having conversations with her. And I wasn't trying to push her to talk with anybody, but ultimately she was there, and then somebody approached her, and then she started outreaching, right? And just the fact that she was able to have that conversation, the person was open. She didn't even know the flowchart, but that's okay. She came, she showed up. That's the most important thing. And I think she was also there today at the We the Free event. So, it's really awesome to see that. And, I think as a group, we need to be supportive in that way to help raise each other up. And that's ultimately going to be the last barrier for confidence.